Good evening and welcome to a special Kelly File investigation, Justice for All in Ferguson. I'm Megan Kelly. Just before noon on Saturday, August 9th, a series of events unfolded in the town of Ferguson, Missouri, that would push the St. Louis suburb into the national spotlight and reignite a fierce national debate on race, police, and the use of deadly force. Officer Darren Wilson had an encounter with 18-year-old Michael Brown and a second young man. By the end, Mike Brown was shot dead in the street in what some call a murder and Wilson calls self-defense. In the weeks that followed, the story exploded into an ugly spectacle of looting and riots with occasional political opportunism and some definite media excess. The FBI, the DOJ, the Missouri governor, the U.S. Attorney General, even the President of the United States have all weighed in repeatedly as a national chorus has demanded justice for Michael Brown. But has all the fury overwhelmed the facts? Are we watching a rush to judgment to satisfy the calls from the crowd? And isn't justice supposed to be blind and for all? Tonight, we investigate the facts thus far, what the witnesses say, what the autopsy shows, and what the law allows. With us tonight, homicide detective Mark Furman, Michael Brown's family attorney Daryl Parks, former police officer and lawyer Judge Alex Ferrer, forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Bodden, who performed an autopsy on Mr. Brown, former DOJ prosecutor J. Christian Adams, and attorneys Mark Eiglarsh and Andel Brown are all here. But we begin on August 9th at 11:50 a.m. on a street in Ferguson, and Trace Gallagher has the story.
And Megan, we still haven't heard police officer Darren Wilson's version of events, and the St. Louis County prosecutor says we won't until this case goes to trial. So we are left to tell the story using what sources close to the Ferguson police have told us, along with eyewitness accounts, including the man who was with Michael Brown when they were confronted by Officer Wilson. 21-year-old Dorian Johnson claims he and Brown were walking in the street when Officer Wilson told them to get the blank on the sidewalk, and that the officer pulled up so close to them that when he tried to open his door, it hit Michael Brown, ricocheted, and pushed the officer back inside his patrol car. Listen.
He just reached his arm out the window and grabbed my friend around his neck and was trying to, as he was trying to choke my friend, and he was trying to get away, and the officer then reached out and he grabbed his arm to pull him into the car.
But a woman who said her name was Josie, claiming to be a friend of Officer Wilson, called into the Dana Lash radio show and said the confrontation began when Michael Brown went after the officer. Play this.
And as he stands up, Michael just bum rushes him, just shoves him back into his car, punches him in the face, and then, of course, Darren grabs for his gun, and Michael grabs the gun. At one point, he's got the gun totally turned against his hip. And Darren, shoves it away, and the gun goes off.
That version of events was supported by a Fox News source close to the Ferguson Police Department, who told us that when Brown punched Officer Wilson, he fractured his eye socket, swelling the left side of his face. The source went on to say that there is strong evidence that Michael Brown did touch Officer Wilson's gun. Dorian Johnson claims that after the gun fired, Michael Brown tried to run away, but the officer chased him and shot him from behind.
Once my friend felt that shot, he turned around and he put his hands in the air and he started to get down, but the officer still approached with his weapon drawn and he fired several more shots.
A female witness backed up that story, saying this. Listen.
He put his arms up to let them know he was compliant and that he was unarmed, and they shot him twice more, and he fell to the ground and died.
But our source maintains that Michael Brown did not stop and put his hands up. Instead, he said, "What? Are you going to shoot me?" and then started going toward Wilson. And witnesses captured on cell phone video seem to support that version. Listen.
Police shot him. Next thing I know, I'm thinking he started running, kept coming towards the police. Police were like at least 10 yards to 15 feet. And I'm thinking the dude was still standing. I'm thinking he was missing. Then he kept coming towards him.
The final tale is told by the private autopsy, which shows that Michael Brown was shot at least 6 times, including a fatal shot to the head. But it also appears that Brown was not shot from behind, though forensic pathologist Michael Bodden says he cannot rule out that Brown was shot while running away. Megan.
Trace, good job. Thank you. Joining us now, former LAPD homicide detective and Fox News contributor Mark Furman and Brown family attorney Daryl Parks. We begin with Detective Furman. Mark, good to see you tonight. And so you can hear the diametrically opposed versions of what happened in this case. In particular, the testimony of the friend, Dorian Jones, I think is his last name, who specifically says that he grabbed Michael Brown, the officer did, around the neck, battled with him in the police car, and that ultimately when the fatal shots were fired, Michael Brown had his hands in the air.
Well, Megan, let's start with, I mean, you can look at this with some professional common sense. The officer, it might be quite impossible for the officer to still be in the vehicle and reach up to a 6'4" man and grasp him around the neck. So that seems to be easily questioned. The second thing is what tactic would the police use to pull a suspect into the front seat of the car with them being down and start an altercation? It's really kind of a stupid assertion. So we have to assume something else occurred. If the officer is attempting to get out of the vehicle, it is clear that Michael Brown was the aggressor. The officer is pushed back into the vehicle. They fight over his gun. He's punched. The gun goes off. The suspect then breaks off at that point, and now Officer Wilson collects himself, gets out of the vehicle, and tries to make an arrest. And these are the areas that come into question. But when witnesses say that Michael Brown was shot in the back when clearly 6 rounds hit in the front of Michael Brown, when they say his hands were up and the medical evidence clearly does not show that, you can argue it until you're blue in the face, but the medical evidence doesn't support either one of those witness testimonies.
I want to correct myself, Dorian Johnson. But here's the thing, Mark. It seems like everyone agrees that after that confrontation at the car, whatever happened, whoever started it, and both sides seem to agree that there was a scuffle that may have involved the officer's gun, Michael Brown ran away. He ran away. And that is what has a lot of people saying, why did he have to fire his gun? Why is he shooting at somebody who he may be ticked off at? He may have just committed a crime by having that fight with an officer, but he was running away.
Well, let's look at that. First, he just committed a robbery. He knows he committed a robbery. The officer there has indications that he heard the broadcast when he was making the contact with Johnson and Brown. So the officer is by himself, in uniform, a one-man car. He calls for backup. So he clearly says to himself, I've got a tactical situation that's serious. You have 2 suspects that have not been searched, so nobody knows if they're armed with a gun or a knife or any other weapon. Nobody knows that. The officer now is involved in a life and death struggle in the front seat of his police car. A suspect is trying to disarm him, and to an officer that can only mean one thing, to kill him. That suspect was not described as running away. He was walking away while he was taunting the officer when he got out and commanded him to stop or freeze. When that suspect now comes back at the officer, that suspect has not been searched. The officer knows he has already committed a robbery, an assault on an officer, quite possibly an attempted murder, and now he's coming back. And the officer's fear of great bodily injury, being out of the vehicle and trying to confront a man twice his size, that's a real fear. And he knows that this suspect not only intended once, but might intend to do the same thing again. All
right. Mark Furman, thank you. So there you have it. That is how the case may play out when Officer Darren Wilson gets his say and offers his side. But as you know, there are 2 sides to this story. And what happened that day in Ferguson, Missouri, as of right now, is far from clear. Up next, Attorney Daryl Parks will share his side of the case, according to the eyewitness testimonials. And later we will look at what the law says about when an officer can use deadly force and when he cannot. Guess what? Running away does not answer the question one way or the other. Plus, when Dr. Michael Baden released his autopsy findings, Michael Brown's supporters said Dr. Baden had just proven their case. But that is not what Dr. Baden says. He's with us tonight, just ahead. Let's just be perfectly clear. Is it possible, based on the autopsy you performed, that Michael Brown was in the process of attacking this police officer when he was shot.
Based on the autopsy finding, that's possible.
And it's also possible that he was surrendering with his hands up.